Hey guys, tonight we're beginning a gentle, slow journey through time, stepping into a tranquil night at Whitehall Palace, where once Elizabeth I drew her final breath. Outside, the ancient stone walls whisper as the night breeze slips through cracks, dancing softly with the flickering candles, while the slim crescent moon spills a silvery ribbon across the still waters of the Thames. You won't survive out here if you can't curb your curiosity, but don't worry, we'll walk together at a leisurely pace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is locally where you are. In this hushed expanse, the chirping of night insects, the rustle of leaves in a nearby forest, and the distant murmur of ocean waves blend into a lullaby of the unknown. The scene unfolds like a misty painting, the watchtower fading into shadows, Tudor, patterned window arches, and moss-covered bricks standing silent witness to secrets long buried. We step into a room bathed in the soft golden glow of candles, where a small table holds an ancient journal, lead white powder glittering in a corner, and a brass mirror cast in a muted sheen. A gentle breeze seeps through silk drapes, carrying the scent of dried roses, mingled with the faint tang of lead and mercury still lingering on formerly proud skin. The entire palace seems to hold its breath, waiting for the story to begin. As you take a slow, deep breath, imagine yourself standing along the stone corridor, hands resting on a weathered oak railing, listening to your heartbeat echo within the earth. Moonlight traces patterns across stained glass panes, dancing softly on the tiled walls, and the midnight clock chimes ever so faintly, a reminder that time marches on even as eyelids grow heavy. In that moment, feel the breath of history. The breath of a queen who survived smallpox, succumbed to a plague of lead and mercury cosmetics, and ultimately locked her deepest secret away within a lead-lined coffin. The tale will whisk you back to fiery feasts, candlelit dressing chambers thick with powder, and the final chamber where she chose eternal silence. Now, release your shoulders, close your eyes gently, and let your spirit drift with the whispering wind. Every tiny sound is part of the story. Hear the leaves brushing the stone walls, the river's current kissing the banks of the dew-laden night. Let these natural details guide you into a dreamscape where history sheds its dryness and fills itself with the sounds and scents of a serene night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Along the side corridor of Whitehall Palace, where candlelight rarely reached, the stone walls stood in soft, silvery grey, cloaked in a velvet-like layer of moss. Each brick, worn smooth by centuries, had drunk in the frost of countless winters. Tiny fractures crept across their surface, like the fine lines of age, each one whispering echoes of long-faded conversations. The Council of Advisors, murmurs from banquet halls, and hushed prayers uttered in solitude. Elizabeth I, the queen who carried an empire within her frame, had once walked here with deliberate, steady steps, especially in the stillness of midnight, when the palace fell into hush and only the wind stirred the roof tiles, and the guards' footsteps echoed in weary rhythm. It is said that as she passed along the corridor, her eyes would rest upon the cracks in the stone traces of old fractures, both within the walls and within herself. One winter night, long ago, when the eastern wind howled through the iron casements, she stopped. Her hand, pale and adorned with heavy rings, reached toward the stone wall and gently pressed against its cold surface as if seeking something lost, something that lived only in silence. Behind her, the ladies-in-waiting dared not speak, only watched in reverence as her silhouette was bathed in the dim halo of a guttering oil lamp. A breeze pushed the curtain, revealing her face in trembling light. The candlelight flickered on her silk scarf, and somewhere in the silence, it seemed the stones spoke. The road is too long, the heart too heavy. She did not answer. Only a faint, wistful smile touched her lips, a breath barely audible. Then she moved forward again. Her hand brushed gently over the dusty sill, as though caressing a memory too fragile to name. These stones had seen everything, her youthful laughter echoing at coronation, the hardened gaze of a ruler balancing sword and scripture, and in later years, the faltering steps of a woman burdened by pain, cloaked in silence. Within the breath of stone lingered a scent hard to name. It was the smell of old wax, of smoky air, of dried herbs stored in royal jars. But if one closed their eyes and breathed carefully, another scent emerged, the bitter sweetness of lead and mercury, the fragrance of cosmetics rubbed deep into the skin. Her powders and creams, her red lips and ghostly pale cheeks, left behind traces too fine to be seen. Each time she leaned against the wall to rest, minute particles of toxic colour settled into the moss, into the cracks, just as the poisons sank into her body. One of her court physicians once wrote, "The queen wanders the corridor nightly, silent as a fallen leaf, searching for something wordless." But the wall remembered. It remembered the rustle of heavy skirts, the sighs drawn between breaths, the long pauses beneath torchlight. In the quiet of the night, when no one else could see, Elizabeth often paused for minutes, touching the wall with fingers grown colder each season, her eyes deep in shadow. No one ever knew what she sought. Perhaps it was comfort from something that would never betray her. Perhaps it was the only voice that did not reflect pretense. In that lonely hallway, there were no mirrors to expose her, no courtiers to flatter, no maids to adjust her veil. Just she and the wall, and the silence that wrapped around them like a second skin. And so the secrets remained, locked within the stone. The wall bore witness to sleepless nights, silent tears, and the slow unravelling of strength. Some say that after her passing, on certain nights, one can still hear the faint sound of footsteps light and measured slipping down the corridor at the hour of deepest dark. The whisper of silk across the floor, the hush of breath caught in memory. Those who've stood there, even centuries later, sometimes speak of a presence not fearful, but curiously warm, as though the past, like a hand from behind the veil, still reached toward the living. The stones, weathered and weary, still hold their place. The moss still grows, cool and soft, and if you press your hand to that ancient wall gently, you might feel a quiet heartbeat beneath, like the last whisper of Elizabeth as she walked there. Who am I without the powder? Who am I without the gaze of awe? The answer lingers somewhere in the fractures of stone, in dreams that never quite wake, in the corridors of Whitehall that stretch endlessly, all the way to now. Not every night has a moon. Some evenings the sky seems to swallow all light, leaving Whitehall Palace illuminated only by flickering candlelight, breathing slowly with the passing wind. In a dressing chamber deep in the northern wing, soft flames danced upon delicate jars, green glass bottles, ivory ceramic pots, and a small silver canister shaped like a painted egg, sitting precisely in the centre of an oak table carved with swirling patterns. A bronze mirror hung behind, reflecting the light like ripples on still water. Unlike the mirrors we know today, this one shimmered unevenly, each reflection blurred like a half-remembered dream, and within that dream shimmered the face of a woman who had weathered many rains, eyes rimmed with red from sleepless nights, her skin pale as porcelain beneath the powder, carefully mixed in a formula known only to herself. That silver jar, like everything in Elizabeth's life, came with a story. It hailed from Venice, from a small workshop nestled along a narrow canal, run by a craftsman named Marco, once honoured by Italian nobility. The powder inside Venetian sous was finely ground white lead, blended with herbal oils, sulphur, and, on certain days, a few drops of grape vinegar for adhesion. When opened, a faint wisp of dust would rise like incense, sweet and mineral, mingling with the scent of lavender that clung to the room's corners. They say there was a time when Elizabeth was shy before the mirror. After the bout of smallpox, that fevered beast that clawed her skin, her face bore small marks, just enough to make pride falter. From then on, the mirror became ritual not for vanity, but for control. Control of image, of emotion, and perhaps of fear itself. Each morning, while mist still slept over the Thames, she would sit before the table. Servants would veil the mirror in 4 layers of silk, removing them slowly as if unveiling an altar. Her face, bare and pale, wasn't ugly, just too real. And reality, for a monarch, was a dangerous thing. Soft brushes of squirrel hair whispered across her cheeks. The first layer of powder was applied, then the second, then the third, this one mixed with crushed pearl dust. The whisper of bristles and the sigh of morning wind played like a duet, setting the score for a sovereign's transformation. No one dared ask why, she continued. The servants had grown used to seeing their queen sit in silence, elbow on table, gazing into the mirror as though speaking to someone she no longer recognized. Perhaps she asked herself, "Am I still me, beneath 30 layers of painted silence?" Outside, England trembled with religious reformation, Spanish fleets, and floods that ruined harvests. But inside this chamber, time held its breath. The candlelight, caught in powdery sheen, crafted a ghostly beauty, a portrait more than a person. When Elizabeth stepped out, people saw a queen, not a woman. But that powder didn't just hide scars. It consumed health. Lead seeped through the skin, year after year. Today's science confirms, even a small dose daily can harm kidneys, cloud memory, cause hair loss, and alter one's emotions. Yet no one then spoke of it, or perhaps dared not. Who would tell a monarch that her beauty was poisoning her? Even court physicians only wrote, pale complexion, occasional fatigue, minor insomnia, not alarming. Though in truth they knew, no flame can burn forever if fueled with poison. How ironic, then, that in the modern world of safety labels and lead-free lipsticks, women still face a pressure not unlike Elizabeth's, to be whiter, younger, more perfect every morning. Today, no one sits for 5 hours before a mirror like Elizabeth did. But someone may scroll for hours, filtering skin, cropping smiles, choosing which angle glows best. Beauty remains a weapon and a shackle, and Elizabeth's warped mirror still exists, now pixelated, nestled within our phones behind softening filters. One final note from a maid read, "Some mornings, she simply stared into the mirror, did not paint, just stared, then sighed. It wasn't tragic. It was like the curl of smoke from a dying candle, weightless, yet unforgettable." Elizabeth, remembered as the Virgin Queen, the warrior of mists, was also a woman, one who feared aging, who longed to preserve a moment of youth, and chose to pay with her body. And somehow, one feels she always knew. On a soft spring morning, wind stirring the curtains, she looked into the mirror, touched her cheek and whispered, "How much of me is left?" No one heard. Only the candlelight answered, trembling on the wall. Autumn mist coiled around the ancient oaks behind Richmond Palace, where swallows flew low and slow, as if afraid to slice the fragile morning air. Inside, firewood crackled gently in a copper-bound hearth. A half-finished portrait of young Elizabeth hung on the wall, her auburn hair draping softly, her skin smooth as cream, her eyes filled with haughty fire. But that face was changing. It was the year 1562. As the first leaves fell into the Thames, Elizabeth was struck by fever, not the ordinary chills of a damp London season, but a searing heat, like coals beneath the skin. The royal physicians grew pale, their hands trembling over her pulse. Red marks began to bloom across her skin, first faint, then dark, angry welts. Within 3 days, the verdict was clear: smallpox. The palace held its breath. Thick curtains were drawn across the windows. Candles burned even in daylight. Whispers passed through the halls like spider silk, heard by all, spoken by none. Elizabeth lay beneath layers of silk, her pillow soaked in sweat, eyes tightly shut, lips clenched as though arguing with death itself. In her fevered dreams, she murmured names, sometimes her father, sometimes her long-dead sister. A court record noted, "High fever for 3 nights, rash widespread, delirium evident." Her attendants rotated in silence, pressing herbal cloths to her brow, burning white resin under her pillows. No one slept for 7 nights. On the 8th, the fever broke. She opened her eyes and exhaled, not like silk, but like someone pulled back from the edge of a deep, cold river. But her face, touched by morning light, was no longer the same. Tiny scars had taken hold of her cheeks, not disfiguring, but enough to still the room. And for Elizabeth, those few seconds lasted forever. Later historians would say, the Queen had returned from death. But few remember that when she rose from that sickbed, part of her faith in her image did not rise with her. A A survivor of smallpox carries more than scars on the skin, they carry scars in the mind, especially when they wear a crown. From then on, she was never seen without covering. Even in meetings with close advisors or state banquets, a fine silk drape would fall gently over her shoulders. Portraits painted after that year shared a new feature: skin white as rice paper, unnaturally smooth. Some say it was Renaissance style, but in truth, it was denial-made art, a way to make the world believe she remained untouched. She began recording skincare formulas: herbal balms from Florence, lip stains from Granada, creams from Germany, each tested on a patch of skin before use. One maid's unofficial diary reads, "Tonight, Her Majesty asked mint juice be mixed into the powder to ease the sting." And so each day became a trial, one without a lab, without a doctor's warning, and often without escape. Curiously, Victorian historians rarely mentioned Elizabeth's smallpox. Perhaps they wished to preserve the image of an unbreakable queen. But the truth is gentler and more human. Elizabeth was not made of iron. She was flesh. She feared. She fought quietly, with herself first, before facing the world. Today, with hundreds of scar creams, lasers, and digital filters, people still stand before mirrors and see their own scars as cracked crowns. Not because they are large, but because they shatter what we once believed was whole. But if Elizabeth could rise, apply her powder, walk out with her head held high, then we too might smile gently at our reflection, even if the scars remain. Because sometimes, scars are proof that we weathered the storm. Each time the wind shifted, the stained glass windows of Hampton Court gave a faint hum, like a whisper caught in glass. Wind drifted through the stone corridors, bringing the damp scent of moss, the ashes of yesterday's fire, and now and then a lingering trace of rosewater from years long past. In a quiet room near the old library, on the highest wooden shelf, rested a porcelain jar no larger than a palm. On its base, faint letters read, "Venetian Suze, Republic of Venice." That soft white powder was once part of the most delicate weapon at the Tudor court, cosmetics. No blades, no swords yet. It swayed hearts, shaped politics, and, silently, slowly, dismantled the very body it adorned. Venetian Suze, the refined product of Renaissance alchemy, was made by cooking lead in vinegar until it turned to a fine white powder, then mixed with almond oil or rose water for a creamy texture. Each jar was wrapped in silk, stored in fragrant pine boxes, and shipped across seas through French ports before crossing the Channel to London. Not everyone could afford it. Only those of noble blood dared wear it, for even death, it seemed, came dressed in elegance. Elizabeth received her first jar of Venetian Suze from a Venetian ambassador during a quiet visit in the gallery. When she opened it, she touched the powder to her hand, lifted it to candlelight. The powder shimmered like porcelain, flawless. In that moment, a decision was made, unspoken, irrevocable. From that day, Venetian Suze would never leave her side. Her maids were ordered to keep the powder in a silver case, never letting sunlight touch it. Each morning they woke her with whispered verses, warmed the powder between their palms, and only then applied it to her face. 3 layers on ordinary days, 5 for diplomatic audiences. On feast days or harvest festivals, 7. It covered her neck, her jaw, her past. Under flickering candlelight and distant church bells, her face emerged like a winter moon, cold, pale, perfect. But behind that light was something no one saw: persistent headaches, parched lips, fingers trembling faintly over royal decrees. At first, she called it fatigue, but the signs grew. Broken memory, moments of fog, a voice that sometimes wavered like wind through stone. Physicians of the time dared not speak of lead poisoning. In their notes they wrote, "Nervous system unsteady, moods unpredictable, pulse follows emotion." Diagnoses that floated somewhere between medicine and poetry. Venetian Suze was not merely cosmetic, it was a political tool. A flawless face made Elizabeth appear to her people as something more than mortal. She was permanence in a shifting world, a white dream for a restless kingdom. Had she stepped into public with the marks of smallpox, the nation might have felt betrayed by the very ideal they built around her. A gentle modern irony may be whispered here. People once scoffed at Elizabeth for using white lead, yet today they apply SPF 50, drink fruit, flavored collagen, and layer fruit acids on their faces in the name of reversing age. Only the names have changed. One was called powdering, the other skincare routine. But the dream remains the same: never age. Modern scientists have tested historical samples of Venetian sous. The lead content in each gram exceeded today's safe limit by more than 100 times. A regular person, using it for a year, could begin suffering neurological damage. Elizabeth used it for more than 30, and yet she reigned. She spoke at Tilbury. She refused marriage. She governed with a singular mind. This speaks not only of extraordinary willpower, but also of a quiet truth. Human beings can do the impossible even while being slowly poisoned each day. Each time she sat before the mirror, Elizabeth would rest her hand on the jar, inhale deeply, and prepare not for an audience, but for a battle. And truly, it was a battle between beauty and truth, between image and self, between flickering candlelight and the slow erosion of a queen's body. There was a soft, clinking sound each late afternoon as sunlight tilted across the domes of Whitehall Palace. The gentle tap of a silver spoon against a mother-of-pearl bowl. No one truly noticed it. The sound was too delicate, too quiet, like the last sigh of a fading rose. But to the woman preparing lipstick, it was the start of a ritual. The corner of the dressing room remained still, like a sacred chamber. Candlelight flickered through thin glass, casting orange-red shadows that shimmered like evening embers. On the table sat a small bowl, carved from pearl, holding cinnabar paste, the deep red powder derived from powdered vermilion ore, rich in raw mercury. Mixed with rose oil, cinnabar became a smooth, luxurious lipstick, its shade dark as dusk hibiscus. The maid dabbed a thin layer on Elizabeth's lips, cautiously, as though brushing the edge of a letter too personal to read aloud. They did not know, or perhaps chose not to know, that with every application, mercury seeped deeper into her bloodstream. Mercury had no scent, no taste, only consequences. When finished, Elizabeth's lips bloomed bright like a rose just opening. In candlelight, her mouth glowed a silent declaration that the Queen lived, ruled, endured. But that same red, over time, became the colour of her quiet unravelling. Unlike powder, cinnabar did not rest on the surface. It entered, especially through the tender membrane of the lips. Modern medicine would later confirm mercury absorbed through mucous membranes moves faster than through skin. Yet Elizabeth wore it daily, sometimes twice, morning and evening. Each time, a little more darkness entered, quietly climbing over the edge of dawn. In youth, she laughed easily, spoke long without weariness. But as years passed, her voice grew hoarser, her words slower. Some ambassadors noted. She paused mid-sentence, then smiled faintly, as if disguising a loss of breath. Royal records described. In recent years, Her Majesty retreats into silence, though her eyes still shine. A phrase wrapped in reverence, edged with quiet sorrow. Once, Elizabeth sat alone by the window. The wind from the Thames rolled in cool, laced with the scent of damp stone. No servant dared approach. She held the bowl of lipstick, gazed at it long, then pressed a bit to her lips, then whispered, "Only when the lips are red will they listen." Her voice floated on the breeze, but the maid behind her heard it clearly, and passed it on, in whispers, from one generation to the next. Among diplomatic archives, a letter from France once noted, "Each time I meet the Queen, she seems a living statue, lips red but unmoving, eyes bright but still." The writer likely didn't know that. For that vivid shade, Elizabeth paid in nightly tremors, and, at times, a silence too heavy to name. Today, lipsticks come in every hue, from nude to violet, yet red remains the symbol of power. Advertisements still murmur, "With just one red swipe, you can conquer the world." But few remember that the first red was cinnabar. And cinnabar is poison, enough to still the heart if swallowed. There's something deeply Elizabethan in how we wear lipstick today. a desire to be heard, to shine, to be beautiful in unyielding light. But like her, we must ask, is the price worth it? Sometimes, a bare smile lingers longer in memory than lips painted to perfection. In the final winter of her reign, Elizabeth could no longer sit upright for long, yet every morning she still asked her maid to stir the lipstick. Though no banquet awaited, no diplomats arrived, she wanted red on her lips. Perhaps it was the last thing she could control, image. Or perhaps it was the final whisper of a woman who once believed beauty was a crown, if not health, then let there be grandeur. Night seemed to fold the palace into its embrace as the final candles flickered low. A quiet draught slipped through the splintered window, lifting the pink velvet curtain and stirring the dust of ages. Within the dressing room, a faint gleam caught on the brass mirror, revealing a scene both ethereal and sorrowful. Elizabeth's hair receding, and the silk mask beginning its silent duty. The courtiers sensed the moment before it came, trailing her footsteps in reverent hush. In candlelight, each strand of silver hair drifted to the tiled floor, as softly as an autumn leaf falling from a branch. At length they would spread a velvet cloth over what remained before she withdrew to the inner chamber, where the ritual of the silk mask would unfold. Elizabeth once bore hair like fire, rich, red, full its colour, a vibrant emblem of her youth. Over time, as lead and mercury seeped into her body day by day, hair became not just silvered, but sparse and surrendering. Court records in later years speak of her wearing nets, adding hairpieces, concealing bald patches with elaborate coiffures. Some evenings, she would sit before the little mirror in silence. The maid might catch her tilting her face upward, candlelight tracing the curve of her scalp thin now, delicate as parchment. In that hush, the hair felt like an echo she could almost hear fall. The silk mask was crafted with solemn care, inscribed with fine gold threads, lined with soft padding, lightly dusted with powder to rest seamlessly on her head. When placed, it did more than hide baldness. It conjured a new visage to present to the world. Candlelight made the silk glow pale ivory, as though the moon had draped itself over her hair. When the maid tightened the strap beneath her chin, the murmur of silk sounded like a breath. Beneath the fabric, her scalp may have tingled, the skin sensitive, aching. Yet she endured it every itch, every pinch to uphold the image seen by others. In a marginal notation, a maid once wrote, "At midnight Her Majesty removed the mask, placed it on the table, and touched her scalp. 'Do you feel emptiness?' she asked. Outside, the people saw royalty. Inside, they saw the mask. That silk veil transformed into a symbol of endurance, where all saw an immutable beauty. None saw the patches of darkness behind. Like today, when people wear beauty masks to hide imperfection, choose lighting for selfies, everything is a screen in front of what we feel is missing but dare not confess. Late portraits depict Elizabeth as a flattened silhouette, hair obscure, face a smooth canvas. They called this the mask of youth, a standard image of eternal grace. Yet few apprehend that the silk mask she wore nightly was part of her performance, a performance the body beneath could not fail. One night, under dim candlelight, Elizabeth lifted the mask. The scalp glowed faintly red, hairs clinging to silk. She placed it gently on the walnut table. Candlelight cast its shadow across the wall, ear-like shapes listening. She stared at it, then whispered to the empty air, "Who knows me beneath this cloth?" The wind sighed through the window, and her question trembled into the darkness. Then she donned the mask again, adjusted a hairpiece, blended powder and silk, and stepped into the audience chamber. To courtiers, she appeared straight and sleek, hair full, brow pure, face flawless. But walls and midnight know the truth. Beneath that painted facade lay a weary woman, a woman who once longed to live honestly. Her servants would later speak. One night the mask dropped to the floor as she shifted sounds so slender, a dry rustle like fallen leaf. They retrieved it, cleaned it, and returned it. No words were spoken, words would crack illusions. Letters from foreign courts praised Elizabeth's composure. She entered with noble bearing, hair arranged, face serene but looked closer. Her hairline falters. A cloak droops to compensate. These letters were stowed in palace archives. No outward scandal allowed. The image must endure. Today, hair loss is hidden with wigs, scarves, fibres, much like Elizabeth's artifice. But now we have treatments, options, reconstructive craft. She had none. In the isolation beneath silk, she suffered and performed. One evening, Elizabeth stood before the gilded mirror with mask in hand. Its silhouette projected twice the mask's and her own reflection. She placed her hand on the glass and whispered, "Which of us is real?" A breath of wind stirred the curtain. Candlelight wavered. The duplicate form blurred into night. Thus, the silk mask became more than an accessory. It became confidant, concealment, and the final wall between a sovereign and a body fading in silence. A late afternoon wind carried through the palace, stirring coloured glass windows, casting long shadows across the stone halls. Foreign ambassadors arrived not with haste, but with measured steps, as guests who sought to hear the silent music folded within the court. Their shadows stretched across the floor, mingling with golden candlelight, as if beckoned into a secret tale. The Spanish ambassador Don Diego Guzman de Silva once noted that Elizabeth carried a miniature of Mary, Queen of Scots, on a delicate chain at her waist. He regarded this small token as a subtle signal. Perhaps in her silence she preserved ties, lineage responsibilities. To him, scarlet lips and graceful posture were not enough to reveal the depths of her courtly heart. He observed quietly, recording details like an archaeologist brushing dust from ancient relics. A French ambassador, Mother Fenelon, in his diplomatic dealings watched how Elizabeth handled correspondence and exchanged gifts, paintings, silks, embroidered messages wrapped with intention. He dispatched letters, promises, tokens of friendship, but his eyes also recorded something fragile, that behind the outward brilliance she kept distance from the world to protect her flesh and secrets. Ambassadors were not merely spectators, they were integral to the theatre of power. When they entered the great hall, the court adjusted curtains, rearranged floor rugs, lit candles, just so that the visitor's silhouette would glide perfectly through the scene. A single misstep might fracture the illusion. Thus, each reception was not just diplomacy, but stagecraft. Elizabeth did not merely speak, she performed with posture, glance, and calibrated smile. Once, Mother Fenelon recorded a reception thus. She entered pale as porcelain, lips vivid red, her silk gown a drifting cloud, yet her eyes held distance, as though gazing at a horizon beyond. In the flicker of candlelight, his words echo more sharply than polished compliments. Not all ambassadors were uncritical. Reports to Madrid hinted that the court's obsession with image bordered on necessity. Exchanges of gifts, gilded decor, splendid ceremonies, perhaps more concealment than tribute. That slight jab that words dressed as diplomacy whispered that perhaps brilliance overshadows truth. Outside the palace walls, French and Spanish envoys compared journals, letters. They described Elizabeth as a living statue, or a spectre lit by candles. To them she was image more than flesh. And yet, deep within, she watched them too, listening with eyes refined to see beyond compliments, beyond ceremony, into the quiet of bones and breath. One dusk, Guzman wrote, when she entered court, the darkness behind her slid forward with every step, as though reminding us, no one knows what lies beneath that mask. In candles' flicker and shifting shadows, one felt a hollow trace of absence, a heartbeat lighter than air. That instant power and loneliness wove into one step into the chamber. In modern life, we have cameras, high-resolution images, live streams, yet one thing remains. An objective gaze can still find fatigue in eyes, tension in posture. A sharp observer may note the strain behind the facade. They mark it not in official report, but in intuition and observation. These ambassadors, with ink and parchment, recorded what the court wished buried, that behind powder and perfection, a body laboured with each breath to sustain a public face. They wrote as silent witnesses honouring constancy of elegance, while sensing decay beneath. And we, telling this story, walk behind their footsteps, listening to the tread on stone, watching candlelight catch a stray lock of hair, breathing in the quiet burden behind ceremonial robes. They came not to see the Queen merely, but to glimpse what words concealed the subtle fade beneath glory. A morning pure as youth returned, found Elizabeth seated still in a quiet chamber, dew-laced light drifting in from the outer corridors. Candles lay unlit, and a gentle glow traced the pattern of the carpet and the damp stone courtyard beyond. She leaned gently back into her chair, eyes fixed on the moist paving stones where mist mingled with dawn's rays. Melancholia, the deep, silent sorrow, had become a faithful companion in her final years. Some days, Elizabeth would sit in utter stillness, refusing counsel, refusing speech, letting her mind wander into the empty spaces. The wind through the roof tiles, distant birdsong, and her own breath blended into a quiet symphony, slow, steady, rhythmic like waves at rest. Court records nota bene. Her Majesty sat motionless for hours, gazing into void. When questioned, she offered only a faint smile and no word. These words feel like the era's breath, tentative, cautious. Courtiers feared her mind faltering, but dared not speak too loud, for the crown still held its echo. Sometimes she tried to sign documents, but her pen would not obey. Her hand trembled like a dried leaf brushing paper. In soft light, her eyes glistened as if dew had settled there. Her memories, stretched across war and plague and politics, may have slipped into shadow, but the realm still awaited her judgment. And she, in silence, strained to preserve her image for the kingdom. The footfalls of servants echoed in stone halls as they brought medicine, teas, herbs to the bed, yet she rarely responded. One day, a glass was placed at her side. She turned her head briefly, then returned to silence. They whispered. She moves through dreams, drifting just beyond reach. Historians later recorded that Elizabeth sometimes gazed toward the Thames as it flowed in soft persistence and whispered, "If I lay down the crown, will one remember me?" The words vanished into the air, like falling leaves. Courtiers offered no reply. Her still figure, distant gaze, became emblem of sacrifice story told, not in speeches but in silent spaces. In modern times, some identify such silence as mild depression, pressure of public life, age, the tension between image and authenticity. Today's leaders, artists, public figures sometimes choose silence to preserve self. When speech grows heavy, silence intervenes as safeguard. Once, Elizabeth was described in foreign dispatches as standing in the reception chamber, observing guests without appearing the Queen's shadow, present yet absent. In fading candlelight, the effect was enough to hush the court. Sometimes that shadow imprinted itself in a diplomat's memory more than any address. Her private physician often noted, "Her Majesty silent, eyes fixed, memory as mist." And elsewhere, she smiled once at news of victory, then returned to stillness. That moment, the flash of brightness in long dusk shone briefly before the world receded once more. Courtiers blinked, then shadows reclaimed the room. Then, in her final days, she lost speech. According to official record, she could not utter a coherent phrase. She traced a small circle with her finger, the symbol of a crown, to indicate her successor. A circle unspoken, a crown without voice, silence as sovereignty. She communicated with gesture, gaze, marks on paper. It was the passage from Queen of Speech to Queen of Breath. This narrative prompts modern reflection. When words fail, people turn to images, silence, subtle motion. In a noisy world, silence can speak most boldly. That evening, Elizabeth sat by a window, the red gleam of dusk touching her weary face. Her lips still red, powder still laid, but the bright spark in her eyes had dimmed. She drew a breath soft as aged wine, then closed her eyes. A steward outside the door paused, hearing her slow, regular breathing, then withdrew in quiet steps. The chamber door closed in hush. We, recounting this, must preserve that silence between lines, hear the slender breath beneath the fortress of power, sense the pale twilight dissolve across her features, and listen to a queen who chose quiet as her final testament between the storm of image and the fatigue of flesh. The ground beneath Westminster Abbey was cloaked in a fine mist, as if breath had risen gently from the ancient stone itself. Pale morning light slid through stained glass windows, painting soft hues of rose, amber, and lilac across the cold stone floor. The silence was so complete that the errant step of a handmaiden echoed like a dry leaf falling into still water. Elizabeth had departed this world, yet the ritual moved forward like a slow waltz. Her lead-lined coffin, twice the thickness of a standard royal casket, rested in the heart of the abbey's great nave, draped in black velvet embroidered with golden thread. The threads shimmered faintly, mimicking a quiet halo around the body at rest. 4 soldiers in polished armor stood at each corner, still as carved guardians, their breath barely visible behind gleaming visors. The early wind from the Thames drifted through a narrow crevice in the stone, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and wild herbs. As it passed among the granite columns, the velvet curtains stirred, whispering softly like the voice of history brushing against the present. Candles burned gently in the sanctuary, their flames quivering at the waxy tips, like a final breath that had not yet faded. In the distance, the bells of the abbey tolled 3 times, low and heavy, reminding all that time does not pause for grief. The elder servants bowed their heads, eyes rimmed in red, though no tears fell. They had long learned to swallow sorrow in silence, a discipline born of service to the crown. Few today recall the quietest moment of the ceremony, the hour of silent prayer. It lasted for exactly 80 breaths. During that time, all activity within the palace ceased. Monks in black robes filed down the central aisle, each holding a candle. Their footsteps padded softly across white carnation petals, flowers Elizabeth once favoured for her vanity table. The petals lifted slightly in the draught, like unspoken farewells drifting into the air. When the coffin was lowered into the crypt, the officiant spoke no words. He simply inclined his head. In that moment, the world seemed to draw inward. Candlelight dimmed, the sun vanished behind a drifting ash-grey cloud, and even the birds atop the abbey fell silent. The velvet pall was gently pulled back, revealing the gleam of the sealed lead surface, quiet as stone, cold as resolve. It was said that during the ceremony, a single silver hair slipped from Elizabeth's head wrap. A handmaiden saved it, pressing it between 2 pages of the Queen's private prayer book. Though no record officially confirms the tale, scholars would later claim to find a faint grey smudge near the final pages, perhaps myth, perhaps poetry. There were no loud cries. In those days, open weeping at a royal death was a breach of decorum. But if one looked closely, they would see the black gloves of the court trembling not from cold, but from the weight of witnessing an era's end. As the rites drew to a close, the candles were extinguished, one by one. The last monk turned and quietly sealed the great stone door. The metallic whisper of the lock echoed softly, like a final drum beat in a room stripped of sound. Outside, the amber dusk painted warm hues onto the weathered stone walls, like an unseen hand offering a gentle benediction. The clock tower above continued its rhythmic tolling, marking each minute as though history had only paused to exhale. Even now, in the heart of modern London, traces of that day remain. A small cafe near the abbey still holds a door, believed to have been carved from the same oak as the altar where Elizabeth once knelt in prayer. A quiet museum displays the ivory comb once used to tame her hair. There's even a luxury perfumery that has attempted to recreate the Queen's favourite scent, based on the notes left by her private physician. Osmanthus blossoms, a hint of mint, and bitter orange oil. In the 21st century, we weep for films, for songs, for digital messages that flash then vanish. But few still mourn in silence, for 80 breaths, like those who once served her. Silence has become something we fear. We run from it with notifications, alarms, and endless streams of sound. But perhaps, just perhaps, if one day we sit quietly, for 80 full breaths, in candlelight, with a faint Baroque melody in the background, we may understand Elizabeth more clearly. The death of a queen is not always tragedy. Sometimes, it is the stillness that lets the world take one long breath and ask quietly, how are we living now, and what crown do we carry on our own heads? A light breeze passed over the church roof just as the last candle had gone out some time ago. The air was thick with a long breath, what some might call the echo of history. Darkness gradually cloaked the stone columns, dyeing them in cold charcoal grey, and in the heart of this hush, the soft footsteps of monks echoed faintly as they carried the leaden coffin its final journey down into the crypt beneath Westminster. The crypt below the abbey lay deep within the earth, where the cool air and low humidity preserved stone from the erosion of time. Under flickering oil lamps, the ancient bricks glimmered like sedimentary eyes. The space felt like a maze of stone. Stairwells narrowed with age, the worn steps whispering of centuries of passage. Dust lay quietly in each groove, settled by the breath of countless years. When the coffin was laid in its final resting place, they slowly moved the stone that would seal the chamber. The sound of stone meeting stone rang out like a heartbeat in the stillness. Inside the crypt, there was no natural light, only the golden flicker of torch flames set in iron sconces. The circle of figures gathered around blood attendants, clergy, aged courtiers, guards stood silent, like living statues. A priest approached with a thick Bible, turning its delicate pages slowly. His voice echoed gently through the chilled air and stone. Let us remember that man has a body, but eternity, a soul. The prayer spilled through the crypt like a morning mist, touching every brick, seeping into the very walls, transforming the burial into not just a ritual, but a quiet crossing between the world of the living and the realm beyond. In one corner, an old carpenter placed a small wooden box into the chamber, rumoured to contain a few of Elizabeth's personal items. An ivory comb, a thin silk scarf, a strand of silvered hair. It was never announced publicly, but a quiet note was recorded in the private logs. Though small, it shall keep her company while the body rests. No trumpet, no fanfare, just a human warmth, transferred from the living to the departed. Few know this. As the stone slab was gently lowered to seal the crypt, a faint cracking sound was heard like the fracture of a tiny rock. Under the flicker of torchlight, one of the guards started, looking around as though he'd heard the coffin breathe. They said it was pressure, a natural effect, caused by the slow shifting of air within a sealed metal container. Not uncommon, especially with lead and chemical preservation. But the tale survives through dreamlike voices. It was the coffin's whisper, her last murmur through stone. Then the silence was complete. The clergy withdrew. Their robes brushed against the damp walls, spiraling up the tight stairwell. When the last soul exited the chamber, only the breath of the stone remained cold, still, eternal. The iron lock turned quietly, a secret sealed in earth, hidden but never wholly forgotten. Above ground, the moon had risen, casting silver ribbons through the stained glass windows. Shadows of trees played across the floor, forming a crown-like pattern over the vaulted ceiling. A breeze entered from the garden, carrying with it the damp scent of moss. The last trace of rosemary from the funeral rites whispers that this place was still alive, still sacred. Today, cameras and geological sensors can peer through layers of stone, mapping the heat signature within the crypt. Forensic experts suggest that, if granted permission, they could confirm levels of lead and mercury in the bones, detect enamel loss from the teeth, and identify traces of disease. But all requests to open the tomb have been denied on the grounds of preservation, of reverence, or perhaps the silence of power itself. There's a gentle irony in this modern age. We unlock gigabytes of digital data, break through encrypted archives, and unearth entire cities with satellites. Yet we refuse to open a single royal tomb. Perhaps we fear the truth might come too close. Perhaps we long to preserve the majesty, unwilling to see fractured bones, cracked teeth, and the lead-drenched exhaustion of a once-living woman. A few times, archaeologists have quietly placed thermal sensors near the crypt's edge. They reported strange hotspots, particularly near the head of the coffin. Some speculate chemical interactions between metal and remains. But this data is rarely publicized. In a world of open data, there are still secrets held within the quietest chambers. And we, as storytellers, listen to the stones shift when the coffin was laid down, feel the chill seeping from the floor into our bones, and imagine the torchlight flickering like a silent heartbeat. Death is not an end. It is a transition from form to memory, from light to shadow, from voice to shared breath with space. If you close your eyes now, picture yourself descending into that crypt. the soft flicker of torchlight over stone, your breath joining the cool air, and the faintest echo of history brushing against your ears. I am here, not lost, not forgotten, only transformed. Each breath is a message. We do not live just to hear ourselves speak, but to let others one day hear us too. A thin mist gently settled on the steep rooftops as the new day broke, casting silver light over the ancient stone arches of Westminster. Time seemed to slow, as if the earth itself inhaled deeply, receiving the imprint just laid into the soil. In that hush, one began to hear the whispers of legacy not through speech, but through the breath of the past, through the dust on a manuscript, through the faint glow in the sunken pockets of history. Under the dim light of dawn, monastery records noted that within the week following Elizabeth's burial, the royal court quietly summoned scholars, physicians, and trusted advisors to share documents, analyze in detail the chemicals used in her cosmetics, the prescriptions, the private records. The meeting took place in a special chamber at Whitehall Palace, lit each night by oil lamps whose pale yellow flames flickered over mother-of-pearl inlaid wooden tables. Some said what they were trying to preserve was not merely the Queen's name, but the reason behind her decline, the reason her body could not be examined. A secret journal noted, "We compared the lead content in the Royal Apothecary's books with imported manuscripts from Venice, from Florence. We traced the mercury in the lipsticks, in the cleansing agents. Illness came not only from age but from beauty." That line traced a soft scratch across the golden veneer. Beauty came at a price. Centuries later, modern scholars discovered a hidden manuscript in the Bodleian Library, written by a lesser-known court physician. In that manuscript was the sentence, "When lead content exceeds the threshold, neurological disease appears. When mercury accumulates sufficiently, enamel vanishes, and the body reacts with convulsions, with trembling hands and feet." Those lines had long been buried beneath the dust of time, yet under today's scientific light, they glimmer with a quiet awe. The physician had glimpsed the future before it arrived. At the Forensic Institute in London, ancient chemical samples recovered from old palace excavations were analysed. They found lead traces tenfold higher than safety limits in soil samples near the crypt, and mercury in the structure of the lipstick powders. When scientists published the findings in the early years of the second millennium, the press titled it, "Was the Queen Poisoned by Beauty?" A question as intriguing as it was gently ironic. Yet, the British authorities continued to deny permission to open the crypt for verification. The reason given was preservation of the relic and respect for the remains. Some say Westminster feared that if the details were revealed, history would be viewed not only with reverence, but also with scrutiny and doubt. Once, an investigative journalist from a scientific journal wrote, "We uncovered many hidden documents from the Royal Archives' lower chambers, yet every request to examine physical samples met the same reply. They guard the lead samples as though guarding secrets beneath a mine." That sentence echoed beneath modern street lamps like the resonance of a fatal experiment few dare admit. A soft modern echo flickers. Perhaps each of us, when applying cream, when using daily cosmetics, unknowingly touches trace amounts of toxins that today's science only partly controls. We advertise lead-free, paraben-free, dermatologist, tested, yet who examines the skin behind the gloss, the blood, the cells? Elizabeth may have been the first witness to that quiet truth. Beauty is not innocent. One evening, as lanterns cast their reflections on the Thames, someone glimpsed a blurred image, the dome of Westminster, mirrored in the slow-moving river. The image split in two, one half clear, the other fading like breath. Some said it was the building, but in the water's light, the image cracked, a torn reflection of the Queen. Others whispered that it was the shadow of legacy, half beauty, half obscured. For years, European museums have displayed 16th century cosmetic relics, white powder jars, red lip pigment tubes, blue cream pots. Visitors peer closely, taking photographs. Yet few glance at the small label, "May contain lead, mercury." Those letters stand like a shard of glass, reflecting how we gaze at historical beauty without knowing its cost. Footsteps echo softly across the museum's stone floors in the late evening. Cold white lights shine upon the glass cases, making the cosmetic samples gleam like remnants of faded glory. But as the lights dim, the shadows of the artifacts expand, blending with the gallery's walls as proof of how beauty and darkness once intertwined. Sometimes, in twilight and light, the fragility of glamour becomes clearer than grandeur. And we, the storytellers, invite you now to gaze slowly at each cosmetic relic behind the glass. Imagine the Queen's hand once brushing against it. Imagine each fine lead particle falling onto her skin, slipping into her bloodstream. Let us listen to the breath of legacy, at once still and radiant, to realize that beauty is not only light, but sometimes the shadow it casts. And each choice of adornment carries with it a quiet footprint of time and chemistry. Beyond the window of centuries, a young crescent moon rises high. Its gentle light stretches like a silk ribbon, wrapping softly around the moss-covered stones of Westminster. Nightbirds glide low through the quiet sky, leaving no sound behind, only fleeting shadows dancing over the calm surface of the Thames, drifting like the final breath of a long day. In the deepest recesses of memory, the spirit of Elizabeth I has not completely faded. Though the world has changed, though the songs of the palace now echo only in history books, her image lingers in every candle-lit tale, a pale face, resolute eyes, and hair once brushed smooth by loyal hands, all now dissolved into the indigo blue of the night. The last candle on her ancient dressing table, where she once sat for hours each morning, still burns faintly. Wax trickles down like tears, and the breeze carries the soft scent of amber and resin into the air. A quiet wind glides across the surface of the old bronze mirror, blurring the reflection into something dreamlike. Perhaps stories of Elizabeth are more than just history. They are the whispers of an era when beauty meant sacrifice, when power was stitched with strands of lead, silver, and the quiet loneliness of a woman who painted her own immortal portrait. This story, like that candle, does not end in thunder, but in a breath light, long and gentle, like the way wind brushes against velvet robes, like the way moonlight touches water without leaving a trace. Tomorrow, you may wake and forget Elizabeth's name, forget the details of white lead powder, cinnabar lipstick, or the silk masks of the Tudor court. But there is something you might carry with you, the quiet moment here, where history is no longer a rigid lesson, but a lullaby breathed in soft light and stillness. Close your eyes for a while. Imagine standing in an old stone hallway, where golden candlelight marks your steps like ribbons of warmth. The breeze brushes past your robe, whispering something you don't quite understand. The moon smiles softly, and the Thames flows on, not hurried, not demanding. Time slows down just enough for you to feel it all quiet, gentle, and deeply real. And now, as the tale draws to a close, let sleep arrive like velvet upon your brow, gentle, without needing to be called. History has finished speaking. The wind has ceased its whisper. Only the moon remains, and you, and a good night wish as soft as silk. May you sleep peacefully, dream sweetly, and rest as gently as the Thames flows beneath the moon.